Yeah, many thanks. I'm going to speak about the role of bogs in the Erzgebirge Mountains. And first of all, some general remarks. Bogs are multifacial natural spaces, and very often they are prone to destruction. In Germany, there was a time, Germany has lost 99% of its initial bog area. This relationship is also true for Saxony. Today we cannot imagine, but in the 12th and 13th century, about 20% of Saxony were actually bog areas. Today we have just 0.8%. Bogs are very exceptional natural spaces, neither water nor land, and they come into being where there is a lot of inflowing water. Once there is a high availability of water and above the ground limit, then there's no longer any oxygen available for the plants, and the result is that turf, that peat is formed, and peat is, so to say, a carbon sink. And the bog degradation on one end and bog growth runs according to several processes, and there are a lot of highly specialized living beings, animals and plants that can be found in bogs only, and they cannot adapt to other surroundings, other environments. Bogs are highly self-regulating spaces. Up to 30% of water can be, and up to 30%, moss can accumulate up to 30% of their own weight in water. Bogs are, as should be known, are carbon sinks. 30% of all the carbon in the world are stored or sunk in 3% of the land surface area, specifically in bogs. Together with coral reefs, they are the only high carbon sinks across the world. This is the map of Saxony showing the occurrence of bogs, the distribution of bogs across Saxony. We have the same regional subdivision according to Mansfeld, as already shown. We have bogs fed by groundwater in the medium range areas. We have just a few bogs, so we have low land bogs fed by groundwater, and we have high range bogs in a higher number in the summit regions. As already said, 0.9% is the current percentage of bogs in the area of Saxony. And here we have the three different regional divisions. So in the mountainous areas, we have 17,000 hectares of bog, 20,000 of bog in the heath, and in the lowlands, we have about 8,823 hectares. What we can see in brown color, this is true for bogs with a peat thickness of more than 0.3 meters. Together with Saxon state-owned Saxon bog areas were analyzed, and ecotope forecasts were developed for these specific areas. The bogs in the Erzgebirge mountains are wide range. So we have pedological criteria forest mapping areas, also nature conservation aspects are used. That's why there are various definitions, and therefore we have a difference, and we say we have between 7,200 and about 50,000 hectares of bog areas. And the Erzgebirge itself accounts for 9,800 hectares. And this is broken down into about 150 bog and peat locations, acid, rainwater-fed bogs, and we have acid intermediate bogs, which are fed also partly by surface water. About 5% of those bogs are close to nature and lowly disturbed. The remaining are largely impacted by mankind. Climate, soil, hydrology, and the profile are the main side factors. In the Saxon ridgetop areas, we have high rainfalls. Rainfalls are higher than evaporation, and we have rather low yearly average temperatures, which is beneficial for the coming into being of high-range bogs. And fog condensation is another important factor for water supply. Bogs exist in high plains with depression areas above 700 meters altitude, and we have 4,000 to 6,000 kilometers of ditches for drainage of the bogs, for peat extraction, and also for forestry use of bog areas. Together with peat management, we have an increase in forests, but the forests are a consequence and not a cause for the dryness in bog areas. As already said, we have highly specialized animals and plants in this area. They cannot adapt to other environments. If they have enough water, the bogs have a bog growth of 1 millimeter per year, approximately. And if you see up to 8 meters of thickness of the peat layer, we know that we have 8,000 years of history in the peat, in the bogs. And it's actually a part of cultural history. The preservation of they preserve and conserve animals and plants which have died in the peat. As already said, it's a CO2 sink, a carbon sink, and bog is also beneficial for erosion protection in case of heavy rainfalls. If you have dewatered bogs, then the water can collect easily through the ditches, the drainage channels. In natural bogs, the water cannot drain so easily. And in case of drained bogs, the peat tends to become hydrophobic. And we risk to lose the carbon sink capabilities of the bogs. Bogs have show a close interconnection between peat formation and profile, vegetation and water. Depending on the water level, we have a typical bog vegetation. Over years, peat will be formed, and thereby changing the profile, the relief, and this, of course, will tend to change the water channels in the bog area. And therefore, in the next step, I'd like to show you a stratigraphic section. And you see, as you can see, by the color codes, the peats have a variable composition in the bogs. We have ditches, low ditches in the bog surface, and as is typical for the regional bogs, we have an inclined surface, slope location, with 10 meters dropping every 500 meters. For re-wetting, we must be careful because it's not possible to supply water in one ride, but we have to use a cascading approach in order to have sufficient retention of the water in the slope condition. And you can also see the red line, which shows the bog condition before dewatering and drainage. And you can see the shrinkage and the settlement of the bog over time. What I wanted to show is that the drainage changes the vegetation and the physical conditions of the soil, shrinkage of the peat layer, creating a new profile, and peat loss is especially large in flat thicknesses, peat thicknesses, and that initial drainage after shrinkage will tend to exponentially increase the drainage over the surface. That is why it is important for re-wetting operations to get the water at the surface of the bogs. During the design phase, it is important to analyze all the disturbances and all the drainage channels of the water in order to come to an optimal action and measure, like filling the ditches based on a hydromorphological analysis, which I'd like to present now. The hydromorphological analysis allows, on the basis of the re-wetting potential, based on the water balance and the ground profile, to assess the development potential of the bog. We can identify different regions within the bog area with a higher wettability and less wettability. On that basis, we can derive certain ecotope types, which can be used for a forecast how to develop bogs in the long run. That is what I'd like to present now. For the hydromorphological analysis, we need a vital and robust model of the ground profile. We have to include the local water balance, and then we are able to calculate the flow, the profile flow of water. Yellow areas are low flow areas, and blue and green are referred to inflow or outflow channels. Then, after addition, then we can divide that and get to transmissivity, which shows high wettability areas. Red is poor wettability, and the other colors are better wettability. And then the next step would be to calculate the slope water fraction. This is the mineral percentage included in the water. It's a trophy measure showing the organic material required for the bog area. When now combining transmissivity, slope water fraction in connection with the layer thickness of the peat, we come to an ecotope forecast, which shows us that based on various space types, which plants and animals can be located or can be introduced in this area. And we can integrate a kind of water dams in retention areas in order to increase the wettability of the bog. And all the theoretical basis will now be illustrated with an actual example. This is a bog area close to Einsiedel. This is the so-called Brandhübelmoor. It's a bog. Catchment area is about 81 areas, and the bog area itself is 133 hectares. 33 hectares. The precipitation is about 1,100 millimeters per year, and peat thickness is up to down to 4 meters. We also have calculations for fog condensation, fog deposition in Saxony. We see the altitude-dependent distribution as a function of altitudes, with 200 to 300 millimeters per year of fog deposition. This is and we need the water balance for our forecast, and therefore we resort to the long year water balance for a period between 1981 and 2010. This climatic water balance shows 500 to 600 millimeters per year of precipitation. Then we added the fog deposition data in order to see how the forecast changes, whether inclusive of fog deposition or exclusive of fog deposition. And so we have found fog deposition to be a rather critical factor in the overall balance. Let's come to the results of the hydromorphological analysis. On the left-hand side, we see the profile-related water flow. The water flows through channels towards the western parts, where it runs off through drainage channels. The core is on that side, right-hand side, and so there is quite intensive drainage. The transmissivity map shows that the fog body itself has been drained and thus is illustrated in red color, up to 80%. That shows that in the catchment area and in the bog body, precipitation is almost the only source of water. There's no other surface water included. Now I would refer the rest of my explanation to the yellow square drawn in the map. Here we have this window, this section. This picture shows in which areas there is a potential for bog-typical plants. And we see a lot of gray. That means there is no typical bog plant development, vegetation. And we have green pixels which show bog forests, bog wood areas. So this is calculated in the forecast. And these are the results zoomed in for a smaller area. When including fog deposition, then we see that some of the pixels show a clear tendency towards a better vegetation for the bog. 3.2% increase of typical bog vegetation, but even the number seems very small. It's a huge leap forward in terms of bog development. This is the current condition again, and when trying now to close the drainage channels with dam barriers, then we have the following picture. We have the bog area with the highest thicknesses of peat layers, and then in rose color or purple, we add dams in the drainage channels, which increase the vegetation of bog plants in the actual bog body. That means that the man-made influence is much higher than the climate conditions. And so I'd like to sum up. Our hydromorphological analysis is a good tool for ecotope forecasts, for designing and planning bog rewetting measures, for catchment areas above for an altitude above 700 meters. We have 200 to 300 millimeters per year of fog deposition, which is a share which accounts for about 20% of total precipitation and has an impact on the wettability and development ability of a bog location. And when including fog, we have a much better quality for the forecast. So it would be very important to remove ditches or dam ditches in order to foster bog development, because the anthropogenic impact is much higher than climate itself. To come back to the climate change in general, there are forecasts saying that we will have more intensive dry phases in summers and higher temperatures in future summers, and that would imply an accelerated drying out of bogs, but we would be able to compensate for this trend by removing or restricting drainage. How about the outlook for the future? What will be the impact of forest restoration on the bogs? We looked into the Hühnerheide Moor. This is the name of a bog area where we have a monitoring network where we can actually measure the water levels. And in the removal of forests is planned in next time, and we want to see whether the removed trees will have an impact on the water level in the bogs, and then we will be able to refine our forecasts. And we will always include fog deposition in our calculations. Many thanks for your attention. I'm available for your questions. Any questions to Mrs. Brust? You were speaking about carbon sink. How about, can you quantify what's the quantity of the storage, carbon storage effect? What's the size? I do not know any precise numbers. I cannot give you a number. Sorry. And do you intend to look into that, to study the storage? No, I'm sorry, I cannot answer this question. I do not know. Hello, I'm Dietrich, student of Eberswalde, forestry student. I would like to comment on your presentation from my own experience. You said that forests are mostly the consequence of dryness and not the cause of dryness. That was one in your first slides. That was in one of your first slides. There's forests, spruce, for example, in Brandenburg, it's pine. Trees in bogs have so high transpiration losses that there actually is an impact on the bogs. The final sentences you were speaking about revitalization. So it's very important to reduce the forest coverage in bog areas. It's the only way, in my view. I think we should differentiate here. In Brandenburg, in the bogs of Brandenburg, you're right. There we have the case, but here in Erzgebirge Mountains, the question is different. Fog deposition is so high that it is able to compensate for the transpiration losses. And that is why we run the studies in the Hühnerheide Bogge, where we remove the trees. There will be more sunlight. And in the Erzgebirge bogs, we do not have any dependency on groundwaters. So in the lowlands, you're completely right. You're fully right. So I think that's true. But the Erzgebirge Mountains have a completely other situation. So it's very important to use the microphone. Otherwise, we cannot. Yes. Brief question. I'm Künzek from Saxon Forest Enterprise, state-owned enterprise. Renaturing of bogs for nature conservation. It's necessary, but we are also here under the aspect of climate protection and climate change, especially as to the carbon sink, to storage of carbon in bogs. So it would be the task of the scientists to calculate the storage capacity, the carbon storage capacity of bogs, and what the relation is with, in comparison with a forest, with a managed forest, and how about carbon storage per area. So, and maybe that wood could be buried in the ground to have a higher sink for carbon. When we drain a bog location, I'm always speaking about the Erzgebirge region. By draining the bog, we mineralized peat for extraction. I cannot give you numbers, but I think the CO2 footprint would be worse than when realizing bogs, when introducing new bogs. So I cannot give you numbers, but that's my impression. Final question. Ullmann Nature Park, Vogtland. As to your calculation regarding the Brandhübelmoor bog, there we had a project, a revitalization project 3 years ago. Did you use the findings? Yes, the current situation. I showed the current situation after the project you mentioned. This is a